Welcome to the Oracle's Rest, a place where stories unfold slowly, where time softens, and where the mind is free to wander. Tonight, the sun goes out, not sets, not sinks behind a hill and comes up again in the morning, the way it always has, goes out. A door of stone closes over the mouth of a cave, and the light that everything alive had been standing in simply stops, and the world is left in a dark it did not know was possible. And behind that stone, in the quiet, is a woman who does not want to come out. This is the story of Amaterasu, the sun, the great goddess who lit the high plain of heaven and the islands below it, and who one day was hurt so badly that she shut herself away and took the daylight with her. It is the story of why she hid and what the darkness did to the world while she was gone, and how 8 million gods stood in a dry riverbed and worked out the one thing that might bring her back, which was not force. Force was standing right there by the door, and force was not the answer. The answer was stranger than that, and gentler, and a little bit ridiculous. And it is the reason there is still a rope hanging across the gate of every shrine in Japan. It comes to us from 2 very old books. The oldest is called the Kojiki, the record of ancient matters, and it was finished in the year 712, set down by a man named O no Yasumaro, who said he was writing from memory, from the recitations of a person at court who had the old stories by heart. The other is the Nihon Shoki, the Chronicles of Japan, finished 8 years later, grander and more official, written for the wider world in the Chinese of the day, and the 2 of them do not always agree. They tell the same night differently in places, and where they differ, I will tell you both, because the disagreement is part of the thing, and because a story that has more than one shape is a story that was truly alive in the mouths of the people who carried it. But before the cave, there is the river, and before the river, there is grief, because the sun was not the first thing. In the beginning, the old book says, there was something like a sea of cloud, formless, drifting, without top or bottom, and out of it the first gods came and went, almost without being, noticed, single gods who arose and then hid themselves away, one after another, as if the world were clearing its throat. And then, at last, came a pair who stayed, a brother and a sister, or a husband and wife, and their names were Izanagi and Izanami, the ones who invite, the ones who beckon. They were given a spear, a long, jeweled spear, and they stood together on the floating bridge of heaven, the rainbow bridge that hangs between the sky and whatever is beneath it. And they reached down with the spear into the grey, drifting brine below, and they stirred it around and around. And when they lifted the spear out, the salt water that dripped from its tip fell back and thickened and piled up. And the first island rose out of the drops, and they went down onto it, and they built a pillar, and they walked around it, and out of their meeting came the islands of Japan, one after another, and then the gods of those islands, the god of the wind and the god of the trees, and the god of the mountains and the rivers and the sea. The whole world was born out of the two of them, the way children are born, patiently, one and then the next, until the last one, the last child, was fire, and a mother cannot give birth to fire. Izanami was burned, bringing the fire god into the world, burned so badly that she sickened, and even the things she made in her sickness, even her tears, even what her body let go of as she suffered, became gods, so that nothing of her was wasted. But she died. The mother of the world lay down and died, and she went to a place called Yomi, the land of the dead, the shadowed land beneath, and the door of it closed. And Izanagi could not bear it. He went down after her, down into the dark to bring his wife back, the way people in every country on earth have always wished they could. And the story of what he found there is a story. For another night, it is enough to say that the dead cannot be brought back, and that he had to run from the thing she had become, and that he came up out of the underworld, shaking, chased to the very entrance, and rolled a great boulder across the mouth of the land of the dead to seal it, and stood on the living side of it, filthy with the grave, alone. And the first thing he did, back in the light, was wash. That is where the sun is born, not in triumph, in the aftermath of a man cleaning the death off his body in a river. He went down to the water at a place among the reeds, and he took off what he was wearing, and each thing he set down became a god as it touched the ground. 12 of them, one for his staff, and one for his belt, and one for each garment, gods of the road, and the crossing, and the coming undone. And then he went into the stream, and he washed the upper part of himself, and gods came from that, and the lower part, and gods came from that. He rinsed the underworld out of his eyes, and his skin, and with every handful of water another god slipped loose, and stood up in the current, until the river was crowded with them. And then he washed his face. He washed his left eye, and out of his left eye came a light, a radiance that had not been in the world before, and it took the shape of a daughter, and she was Amaterasu. Her name means the one who shines in heaven, the heaven illuminating one. And she was the sun, and even her father, who had just made an entire pantheon out of his own bathwater, without much comment, stopped when he saw her. He washed his right eye, and out of his right eye came the moon, a sun, pale and cool, Tsukuyomi, the counter of the months, the one who would rule the night. And he washed his nose, and out of his nose came a storm, a sun again, wild from the first breath, and his name was Susanoo, the impetuous one, the raging male. And he came into the world already unhappy, and he would stay unhappy for a long time. And everything that happens tonight happens because of him. 3 children from the 3 washings, the sun, the moon, and the storm. And Izanagi looked at the 3 of them, the last and best of everything he had made. And he was glad, so glad that he took the string of jewels from around his own neck, the beads shifting and clicking together, and he gave them to Amaterasu, and he told her, "You will rule the high plane of heaven. Take the sky. It is yours." To the moon he gave the realm of night to rule beside her or across from her, the 2 of them dividing the day between the bright and the dark. And to the storm he gave the sea. "Rule the wide ocean," he said. And it should have been enough. It was a whole domain, the largest of the 3, all the water in the world. But Susanoo did not want it. He would not go to the sea. He would not take up the thing he had been given. Instead, he wept. He stood in the world his father had made for him, and he cried, and he did not stop crying, not for a day or a season, but for years, and his weeping was not a small thing, because he was not a small thing. He was the storm. When the storm weeps, it weeps weather. The green mountains withered under his crying. The rivers and the seas he had been given dried up and pulled back. His grief was a drought and a wind at once, and the sound of the bad gods in the land rose up like the buzzing of flies in the hot months, and every kind of trouble broke out at once, because the one who was supposed to be holding the ocean was instead standing still and howling. And his father came to him and asked him, "Why? Why do you not rule the country I gave you? Why do you only cry?" And Susanoo said, "I want my mother. I want to go to my mother, to the land where she has gone, to the deep underworld. That is why I weep." And it is worth stopping on that, because it is the truest thing anyone says in the whole story. The storm is not evil. The storm is a child who wants his dead mother and has been handed the sea instead, and cannot be consoled, and does not know what to do with himself. And so he breaks things. He is grief that has nowhere to go, and grief with nowhere to go does not stay quiet. It looks around for something to ruin. His father was furious and heartbroken, and he did the thing a parent does at the very end of patience. He said, "Fine, then you cannot live here. If you will not rule and you will only weep for the dead, then go." And he drove his own son out of the world. And Susanoo agreed to go. He would go down to the underworld, to his mother, to the shadow land. But first, he said, he would go up to the high plane of heaven to see his sister, to say goodbye to Amaterasu before he left the living world for good. And that was the moment the trouble found the sun, because when the storm began to climb toward heaven, the whole sky shook. He did not come quietly. He came the way weather comes over a mountain, and the mountains and the rivers all cried out as he passed over them, and the earth trembled under the weight of him rising. And up in the high plain, in her bright country, Amaterasu felt it coming, and she was afraid. She knew her brother. She knew the size of him and the temper of him. and she looked at the sky bending under his approach, and she did not believe for one moment that he was coming up to say a gentle farewell. She thought, he is coming to take my kingdom. He has been given the sea and he despises it, and now he is climbing up here to take the sky from me the way. He takes everything by storm. And so the sun goddess armed for war, and this is one of the images I would ask you to hold on to tonight, because it is not the image people expect of her. We think of the sun as warmth, as a gentle disk, as the thing that opens the flowers. But when she thought her country was threatened, Amaterasu, the radiant, unbound her long hair, and she wound it up into the 2 great knots that men wore going into battle, and she wrapped strings of curved jewels around those knots and around her wrists, the beads her father had given her. And she took up a bow, and she slung across her back 2 quivers, one holding 1,000 arrows and one holding 500 more. She strapped a guard of leather to her forearm, so the bowstring would not tear her, and she gripped the bow so hard in the middle that it creaked, and she braced her legs, and she began to stamp. She stamped her feet into the hard ground of heaven, and the earth gave way beneath her like new snow, thigh deep, and she kicked the loose dirt away in showers, and she stood in the pit she had stamped for herself with an arrow already on the string. And she shouted at the sky, "Why are you coming? What do you want here?" And her voice was the voice of a warrior, and she was not the sun in that moment. She was a soldier defending a border, terrified and magnificent, waiting for her brother to break over the hill. And Susanoo, arriving, was hurt that she thought so little of him. He said, "I have no bad heart. I am not here to take anything. Our Father has cast me out, and I am going down to the dead, and I only came to see you before I go. That is all, I swear it." And she did not believe him. Of course she did not. You do not put down 1,000 arrows because someone standing in the wreckage of the sky he just climbed through tells you. His heart is pure, she said. Prove it. How do I know your heart is clear? And here the 2 old books give the strangest contest, and it is a contest that resolves nothing, which is exactly why the disaster happens. They swore an oath together, a nukehi, a pledge made by producing children and reading the answer in what was born. They stood on opposite banks of the heavenly river, the tranquil river of heaven, the band of stars. And they made an agreement. We will each make children, and the kind of child that comes will tell us the truth of your heart. She asked for his sword, and he handed his long sword across the river, and she took it and broke it into 3 pieces, and she put the pieces in her mouth in the pure well of heaven, and she chewed them, and she blew them out in a fine, bright mist. And out of that mist came 3 goddesses, 3 daughters from his sword. And then he asked for her jewels, and she took the strings of curved beads from her hair and her wrists, the beads her father had given her, and she passed them across, and he took them and put them in his mouth and chewed them and blew out a mist of his own. And out of that mist came 5 gods, 5 sons from her jewels. And now, whose heart did the pledge prove? They could not even agree on that. Susanoo cried out that he had won, that his heart was shown to be pure, because the children born from his part of the pledge were gentle, were female, were mild, and a gentle heart makes gentle children. And so he was innocent, and he was right to be trusted. And he was so overjoyed at winning, so triumphant at being proved clean, that his triumph turned immediately into the thing he had just sworn he did not carry, because winning made him wild. And this is the terrible logic of him. He is told he is trusted, he is declared pure, and the relief of it comes out of him as destruction, because that is the only shape his feeling knows how to take. He raced through the high plain of heaven in his joy, and his joy left ruin behind it, exactly the way his grief had. Amaterasu, you must understand, was not only the sun, she was a farmer. The high plain of heaven had rice fields, the sacred paddies, and she tended them, and the whole order of the year turned on them, planting and flood and harvest. And her brother, in his triumph, went into her fields and tore them apart. He broke down the narrow ridges of earth that hold the water in the paddies, the little dividing walls that a whole civilization of rice depends on, so that the water ran out and the fields drained. And the work of a season was undone in an afternoon. He filled in the irrigation channels she had dug. He scattered seed twice over land already sown, which sounds like nothing, which sounds almost generous, until you know that double sown seed chokes itself. And the second sowing is a curse laid on the first, a way of ruining a field by pretending to plant it. And she forgave him. That is the part people forget. She made excuses for him. When her attendants came to her and said, "Look what he has done to the fields," she said gently, "Perhaps he did not mean it. Perhaps it only looks like waste. My brother must have thought it a shame to let good land sit idle. So he sowed it again. Perhaps he was drunk and sick and did not know." She stood in front of the damage, and she found a kind reading for it again and again, the way you do for someone you love who is coming apart. And she kept doing it long past the point where the kindness made any sense, because the alternative was to admit what he was. And he took her forgiveness as permission. Every excuse she made, he answered with something worse. He defiled the sacred hall where the first fruits of the harvest were tasted, the holy room where the new rice was offered. He fouled it, left his filth in it. In the one place in heaven that was supposed to be clean. And still she covered for him. It was only the vomit of a drunk. She said he did not know what he was doing. And then he did the thing that could not be excused. There was a hall in heaven where the weaving was done, the sacred weaving hall where the garments of the gods were made, the cloth of heaven itself, and Amaterasu was there in one telling, sitting at the loom, or in another, telling her heavenly. Weaving women were there at the looms, the pure maidens who wove the god cloth, and the shuttles were going back and forth. And the room was full of that particular quiet that a room of weaving has, the soft clack of the looms and nothing else. And Susanoo took a horse, a dappled colt of heaven, a piebald celestial horse, and he flayed it. He skinned it alive, and he skinned it backwards, tail to head, which was not just cruelty, it was a named crime, one of the gravest ritual wrongs there was, the backward flaying, an act so wrong it had its own place on the list of the great pollutions. And he took the raw, wet, skinned body of the horse, and he broke open the roof of the weaving hall, and he threw it down through the hole into the middle of the quiet room. onto the looms, and in the shock of it, one of the weaving maidens started so violently that she drove the sharp shuttle of the loom up into herself, into her body, and she died of it. In the Kojiki, it is a heavenly weaving woman who is killed this way. In the Nihon Shoki, it is worse. In one version, it is Amaterasu herself who is wounded by the shuttle, the sun goddess's own body hurt at her loom. Either way, the thing was done. Blood in the weaving hall, a death, or her own wound, where there had never been either. And all the excuses in the world ran out at once. And Amaterasu was afraid, not angry. In the oldest telling, afraid. The books say she was seized with terror and grief, and she rose from whatever was left of that ruined room, and she went, and she opened the door of a cave in the rock of heaven, the Ama no Iwato, the rock door of heaven, the cave of the heavenly stone door. And she went inside, and she took hold of the great stone that stood beside its mouth, and she rolled it across the entrance, and she sealed herself in, and she stayed there, and the sun went out. There is no way to make that phrase feel as heavy as it was. So let me only tell you what happened. The high plain of heaven went dark. The central land of the reed plains, which is the earth, the world of people, went dark, and it was not the dark of one night, the friendly dark that you know is temporary, the dark you fall asleep in because you trust the morning. There was no morning. She had taken the morning into the cave with her and pulled the stone across it. It was permanent night, total and everywhere, and with no promise in it at all. And in that endless dark, everything went wrong. The old book has a line for it that has never been improved on. It says, "The voices of the myriad gods were like the flies in the fifth month as they swarmed, a buzzing, a rising panic, 8 million gods, all crying out at once in a black they could not see each other in, and every kind of calamity arose. All manner of evil broke loose in the dark all at once, because the light had not only been warmth and growing, the light had been order, had been the thing that kept the bad gods in their places. And with it gone, they came up out of every corner, and the world that had been so carefully made island by island, out on the floating bridge with a jeweled spear, filled up with woe in a single stroke. And it was cold. That is the thing that is easy to forget, because we tell it as a story about light, but the sun is also the warmth. And when she went into the cave, the warmth went with her. The rice in the flooded fields stopped growing in the dark. The plum trees did not know what season it was. The animals that sleep by day and the animals that sleep by night lost the difference between them and wandered, confused, in a world that was all one thing now. Nothing opened, nothing closed. The flowers that follow the sun across the sky had nothing to follow and hung their heads. There was no noon to work by and no evening to rest by and no dawn to hope toward. There was only the one long dark going on and on, with the buzzing of the frightened gods rising through it like the sound of a fever, and no way to tell how long it had already lasted, because the only clock the world had ever had was shut inside a cave. The storm had wanted to hurt his sister, and in hurting her he had put out the light of the world. And now the 8 million gods had to get it back. They gathered, all of them, every god there was. And they came to the one place that even in the dark they could find their way to, the dry bed of the tranquil river of heaven, the wide stony river bank of Ama no Yasu no Kawara, the peaceful river of heaven's shore, where the gods always met to take counsel. They crowded onto that dark riverbed, and they could not see one another, and they had to decide what to do. And there was nothing any of them could do, because the thing they wanted was on the other side of a stone. She had closed herself, and she did not want to open it. You cannot break down the door of a god. You cannot order the sun to shine. She was not being kept in the cave against her will. She had gone in on purpose and shut it on purpose. And every one of those 8 million gods knew that the moment they broke the stone and dragged her out by force, they would have lost her forever, because you do not win back a heart that way. You can win back a body that way. You cannot win back a heart. So they went to the wisest one. There was among them a god of thought, of deliberation, whose name was Omoikani, the one who gathers many thoughts, the mind that can hold 100 considerations at once and turn them over, and they put it to him, and he thought, and the plan he came up with is the whole hinge of the story. And it is not a plan to break the door. It is a plan to make her want to open it. It is a plan built entirely out of curiosity and light, and above all, out of the sound of other people being happy without her. Here is what he had them do. First, the birds. He gathered the long crying birds of the eternal night, the roosters, the cocks that crow before dawn, and he set them where the goddess would hear them and had them cry out together. The birds that call the sun up every morning of the ordinary world, calling now into a dark that had no sun to call, singing the dawn at a sky that had forgotten how. And people have wondered ever since whether that is why the rooster stands where it stands in Japan, at the edge of the sacred, and there are those who say the bird perch gate, the torii eye that stands at the entrance of every shrine, takes its very name from the perch of those birds who called to the hidden sun. Though the scholars are careful to say that is a folk story about the word, a lovely guess, not a proven thing. But the roosters were there. The first thing on the plan was birdsong in the dark. Then he sent for metal. Down to the heavenly river he sent, and up onto the heavenly mount of Kagu, the sacred mountain. And they gathered hard iron and copper, and they found the divine smith. And they called the goddess, who was the ancestor of all the mirror makers, Ishikoridome, the one who casts the shape. And they had her take the metal and beat it, and polish it, and polish it, until it was a mirror, the first mirror, a disc of metal burnished until it held the world in its face, until anything bright that came near it was thrown back, doubled. They made it very carefully, because everything depended on what it would one day reflect. And they called another god, the ancestor of the jewel makers, Tamanoya, the jewel ancestor, and had him string a long, long rope of the curved jewels, the magatama, the comma-shaped beads of green stone, 500 of them on a single strand, a river of jewels. And then they went and got a tree. They uprooted a whole sakaki tree, a true sacred sakaki, 500 branches of it, from the heavenly mount, roots and all, and they set it up on the river bank facing the cave, and they dressed it. On the high branches they hung the long string of 500 jewels. On the middle branches they hung the great mirror, the new-made mirror. Facing the door of the cave, so that whatever came out of that door would meet its own light, and on the lower branches they hung streamers of soft cloth, white cloth and blue cloth, offerings, the pale banners you still see tied to sacred things in that country, moving a little even where there is no wind. And it was a strange and beautiful thing to build in the dark. Picture it, if it helps you drift. The whole company of heaven working by no light, but the little they could make, out on the wide stony bed of the river, with the black water somewhere near, and the great tree dragged up roots and all from the sacred mountain, and stood upright in the shingle facing the sealed door. The 500 jewels along the high branches, green stone catching what glimmer there was and giving it back, the mirror in the middle, a disk of dark metal that was not dark for long, the pale streamers of cloth on the low branches, white and blue, lifting and settling, lifting and settling, in the small stirrings of the air, the smell of the fresh cut wood and the smell of the offerings, the roosters somewhere in it, crying and crying again, calling up a morning that would not come, and all of it aimed at one closed stone, arranged with enormous care, like a table set for a guest who has said she is not coming, in the hope that the sight of the table might change her mind. And two gods took up the tree and the offerings and held them. Ame no Koyane, the ancestor of the great priestly line, that would one day be the Nakatomi and the Fujiwara and Futodama, the ancestor of the Inbei, the ritual family, the ones whose descendants would hold the offerings at every court ceremony for 1,000 years. And Amino Koyane began to recite. He lifted up a grand liturgy, a long ritual prayer, a norito, the first of all the prayers, chanting the words into the dark in front of the sealed stone, the deep, formal words that priests have been reciting in that same cadence ever since, because this is where they say the reciting began. And one more, God they placed, and they placed him carefully, and they placed him to the side, out of the light, pressed flat against the rock right beside the door, where he could not be seen. Ame no Tajikarao, the god of the strong hand, the god whose whole nature was the power in an arm, the strongest of all of them, and his single instruction was to wait, not to pull, not yet, to stand hidden against the stone and do nothing at all, until the exact moment, and then to be faster and stronger than a goddess changing her mind. So, the roosters were crying. The tree stood dressed in jewels and cloth with a mirror in its heart, facing the door. The prayers were rising. The strong God was hidden against the rock. Everything was ready, and none of it would have worked. Bird song and prayer and a decorated tree. She could have listened to all of it from inside her grief and never moved. There was a hole in the plan, the exact shape of a reason to come out, and something had to be put into it. And what they put into it was a dance. There was a goddess named Ame no Uzume, the dread female of heaven. Her name is sometimes given the whirling one, the one who is not afraid of anything. And she is the one the whole rescue turns on. And she is the least dignified figure in it. And that is the point. She got a tub, an ordinary wash tub, and she turned it upside down in front of the cave to make a drum of it, a sounding board, a stage, and she bound up her sleeves with a cord of heavenly vine, and she took sprigs of the sasa bamboo grass in her hands to rattle, and she wound club moss from the sacred mountain around herself, and she climbed up onto the overturned tub, and she began to stamp. She stamped on the hollow tub, and it boomed. She stamped a rhythm, and the tub answered her like a drum, and she danced. And as she danced, something came over her. The book says she became divinely possessed, that a god came into her, that she went out of her ordinary self into the trance, where the dance dances itself, and in that state, on the drumming tub, in front of the sealed door of the sun, in front of the entire assembled population of heaven, she pulled open her clothes. She pushed the band of her dress down and let her breasts fall out, and she pushed her skirt string down low, and she exposed herself completely, laughing, stamping, whirling, holding nothing back at all, and heaven roared. 8 million gods, who had been standing in the dark, buzzing like flies in their fear, saw the dread female of heaven dancing half naked and possessed on a wash tub, and they burst out laughing, all of them at once, a wall of laughter so huge that the high plane of heaven shook. With it, the ground trembled the way it had trembled when the storm climbed the sky. But this time it was joy, a great helpless roar of laughter rolling out across the dark riverbed and breaking against the stone door of the cave. And inside the cave, the sun heard it, and she could not understand it. Think about what that sound was. From inside, she had sealed herself away in grief. She had put out the light because the world had become unbearable, and she had every reason to believe the world outside her door was exactly as she had left it, dark and frightened and mourning her. And instead, through the stone, came the sound of the entire company of heaven laughing until the earth shook, not weeping, not begging, laughing. And she was. The old book says, puzzled. She thought to herself, how can this be? I have hidden myself away, and heaven must be dark, and the reed plains must all be in darkness, and everything should be in mourning. So, why is Ame no Uzume making merry? And why are all the 800 myriad gods laughing? And that question is the crack in the door, not force. A question. She had shut herself away from a world she assumed was destroyed, and the sound of that world laughing without her was the one thing she could not simply endure. She had to know. And so she did the thing they had built the entire plan to make. Her do. She reached out and she took the edge of the stone door and she pushed it open. Just a crack, just enough to speak through, just enough to see. And she called out through the crack, I thought that by hiding, heaven and earth would go dark. How is it that Uzume dances and all of you laugh, and Uzume dancing, ready for exactly this, called back the lie that had been prepared. She said, we rejoice, and we laugh, and we dance, because there is a goddess here more illustrious than you. A greater deity than you has come. That is why we are glad. And as she said it, the two priest gods stepped forward and lifted the mirror. They raised the new-made mirror from the middle branches of the tree, and they held it up so that its bright face was pointed straight into the crack of the door. And Amaterasu, looking out through the gap, saw a light. She saw in the mirror a radiance coming toward her out of the dark, a shining face she did not recognize, another sun, blazing, and she did not understand that she was looking at herself, at her own light thrown back at her by polished metal, For the very first time, she thought, it is true. There is another goddess, brighter than I am, and she has come while I was hidden. And she was amazed and troubled and drawn, and she opened the door a little more to see this rival light more clearly. And she leaned out toward it, out past the edge of the stone, reaching a little into the open to look at the shining thing that was only ever her own face. And the hand took her. Tajikarao, the strong-handed god who had been pressed against the rock beside the door in silence, through all of it, through the roosters and the prayers and the dance and the laughter, waiting for one moment and one moment only. He took her by the arm and he pulled. He drew the sun out of the cave in a single motion, out into the open, and she could not go back, because the instant she was clear of the mouth of it, the priest god Futodama stretched a rope across the entrance behind her, a sacred rope, a rope of twisted rice straw, and he drew it taut across the black mouth of the cave, and he said to her the words, "You may not go back in, past this. Beyond this rope, you may not return." And that was all. That was the whole of it. No blow was ever struck against her. No stone was ever broken. She was not dragged out of hiding by an army. She was drawn out by her own curiosity and her own reflection, and a rope drawn quietly across the door. Behind her, while she stood blinking in the light she had made, and the light came back. The high plain of heaven grew bright again, all at once, the way a room comes back when you think you have blown out the lamp and it flares up instead. And the central land of the reed plains, the earth, the whole dark, suffering world of it, brightened, and the buzzing of the flies died away, and the calamities crept back into their corners, and the roosters, who had been crowing into nothing, were suddenly crowing into a dawn that answered them. And it was morning. It was morning everywhere. It was the first morning after the longest night there has ever been, and every rope stretched across the gate of every shrine in that country from that day to this one is that rope, the shimenawa, the great twisted straw rope you will see slung across the entrance of a holy place, or around the trunk of an old tree, or between two rocks standing in the sea, marking the line between the ordinary world and the sacred one It is the rope Futodama drew across the cave. It says, the sacred is on the far side of this line, and it does not come back across. It is the oldest boundary there is, and it was first drawn behind the back of the sun to keep her in the light. And there was still the matter of the storm, because Susanoo was still there, still in heaven, still the cause of all of it. And now that the light was back, the 8 million gods turned around and looked at him, and there was a reckoning. They did not kill him. That is worth saying, because you might expect it. And they did not. What they did was try him, and fine him, and punish him, and cast him out. They imposed on him a fine of a great many tables of goods, 1,000 tables of offerings heaped up to purify what he had done, restitution for the fields and the hall, and the death in the weaving room. And they cut off his beard, and they pulled out the nails of his hands, and the nails of his feet, so that he was marked and diminished and made to bleed for it. And they expelled him. They drove him out of heaven with a divine expulsion, cast him down out of the high plane, and he fell. And here the story opens a door onto everything that comes after, and I will only stand in the doorway of it, because it belongs to another night. He fell to the earth, to the land of Izumo, out on the western coast, and he came down beside a river, and he saw a chopstick floating on the water, and he followed the river up to where an old man and an old woman sat weeping with their daughter, because a great serpent with 8 heads and 8 tails, the Yamata no Orochi, came every year and ate one of their girls, and this was the last one. And the storm god, who had wanted his dead mother, who had broken the fields of heaven and put out the sun, the same one killed the serpent for them, got it drunk on 8 vats of rice wine, and cut it apart in the dark. And inside the 4th tail of the serpent, his blade struck something hard, and he reached in and drew out a sword, and that sword he sent up to heaven, to his sister, to Amaterasu, as an offering, as an apology, as the thing the storm gives the sun when it is finally too late. Sorry, the grass-cutting sword, Kusanagi, so that at the end of it there are 3 things. There is the mirror they made to draw her out of the cave. There is the string of 500 jewels they hung in the tree. And there is the sword the storm pulled out of the serpent and sent back up in shame a mirror, a jewel, a sword, and those three things became the treasures of that country, the sacred regalia, the three objects that were handed down. The story says, from Amaterasu herself to her descendants, and carried down to earth, and passed from ruler to ruler, ever after as the proof, and the substance of the right to reign. A mirror that was made to show a hidden goddess her own light. A jewel that hung in the rescue tree. A sword pulled from a monster by the one who caused all the grief. The three of them, together, the heart of a throne. And the mirror went to ice. There is a shrine at Ise on a river among old cedars, and it is the most sacred place in the whole of that country. And it is Amaterasu's, and in the innermost part of it, they say, is the mirror, the sacred mirror, the very one, wrapped and wrapped again, and set in the dark of the inner shrine, where no one may look at it, where no ordinary person has ever seen it, and no one ever will. The goddess told her descendant, when he came down to rule the earth, to keep the mirror and to look upon it as if it were her very self, her spirit, her own face. And so, in the deepest room of Ys, there is a mirror no one sees. That is the sun, kept in the dark, on purpose, the way she once kept herself in the dark in the cave. And every 20 years, for more than 1,000 years, they have taken that shrine down and built it again, right beside the old one, on an empty plot kept waiting. They build the whole shrine new, from fresh cypress, in the old way, with the old joinery and no nails, and they move the sacred things across into the new building, in the night, in procession, in the dark, and then they take the old shrine down, so that the holiest place in the country is never old and never quite new. It is always being rebuilt. It is torn down and it comes back. Torn down and it comes back every 20 years, forever, which is the same thing the sun does, which is the same thing the story is about. The light goes, and it is made to come back. Nothing is kept by holding it still. It is kept by letting it go into the dark and drawing it out again. And the children of the pledge did not vanish either, the ones born in the mist over the heavenly river, before any of the trouble began. The 3 daughters who came from the storm's broken sword were cast, sent far to the west, out over the sea, to guard the water road between the islands and the mainland. And there is a shrine to them still, out among the straits, 3 sisters watching the sea lanes, one of them on an island so holy that for a long time no one was allowed to set foot on it at all. And the 5 sons who came from the sun's own jewels stayed nearer to her, and the eldest of them mattered more than all the rest, because the line of him is the reason the whole story was written down in the first place. His name was long, and the short of it is Oshihomimi, and he was the first son from the sun's beads, and he was hers, counted as her child, because they were her jewels. That made him. And in time, Amaterasu looked down from the high plain of heaven at the central land of the reed plains below. The earth. Once it had been quieted and made ready, and she meant to send that son down to rule it. But he looked at the long climb down and the trouble waiting, and he asked to send his own son instead. And so it was the grandson who went, a god called Ninigi, the sun goddess's grandchild, who came down out of heaven onto a mountain peak in the south, on the island of Kyushu, to rule the earth in her name. And she did not send him down empty-handed. She sent the 3 treasures with him, the mirror and the string of jewels, and the sword the storm had drawn from the serpent. She put into his hands to carry down to the world, and with the mirror she gave him the words that Is has kept ever since. Look upon this mirror as you would look upon me. Let it be my spirit. Worship it as you would worship my very self, so that the sun did not go down to earth herself, but sent her light down, folded into a disk of metal, and a grandson to carry it, and a sword and a jewel to stand on either side of it, and told him that as long as those things were kept, she was with him. And from that grandson, the old books say, the line came down, generation after generation, to the first emperor of that country, and from him onward, so that every ruler who ever sat on that throne traced the blood of it all the way back up the mountain and into heaven and into the cave, back to the sun herself. Whatever you make of that claim, and it is a claim, and men have believed it, and men have doubted it, and it has been used for good ends and for terrible ones. The shape of the story they were telling is plain enough. They were saying that the light in the sky and the light of a life on earth run down the same thread, that the thing that warms the rice fields and the thing that sits on a throne and the thing that goes into a cave and has to be coaxed back out again with a dance are all somehow one story. The sun has a family, and we are told, if we go back far enough, we are in it. And the dance did not end either. Ame no Uzume, the goddess on the wash tub, the one who was not afraid to be ridiculous in front of the whole of heaven, became the ancestor and the origin of the sacred dance. The Kagura, the dance of the gods, the stamping and the trance and the rhythm on the hollow drum. All of it is said to begin with her on the tub in front of the cave. She is the first performer. She is why there is dancing at the shrines at all, and there is something in that worth keeping, that when the sun had shut herself into the rock, and prayer alone could not reach her, the thing that finally did was a woman willing to be laughed at, not the strongest god, not the wisest words, the dance, the laughter, the tub. And the storm's whole list of crimes did not vanish either. The breaking of the paddy ridges, the filling of the ditches, the double sowing, the backward flaying of the horse, the filth in the sacred hall. Those exact acts became the named catalogue of the great pollutions, the heavenly offences, the wrongs recited in the great purification, the ritual that cleanses a whole people twice a year. When the priests of that country stand up and name the things that must be washed away, they are naming what the storm did to his sister's fields. His tantrum became the definition of pollution itself, the very shape of what it means to defile a place was cut, once and forever, from one bad afternoon in heaven. And there is one more way to read the whole of it, and the old scholars have argued it for a very long time. And I will give it to you gently, as one reading among several, not as the answer. Some say the story is the sun itself, not a goddess who behaves like the sun, but the sun told as a story, that the hiding in the cave and the long dark and the coaxing out again is what the sun does. Some read it as an eclipse, the sudden wrong darkness in the middle, of the day, the panic of it, the desperate noise people make to bring the light back, and then the light returning as if it had been persuaded. Some read it as the winter, the low, dead, cold part of the year when the sun grows weak and distant, and the world goes grey and afraid. And the turning of the solstice as the moment she is drawn back, out, the days lengthening again, the light returning branch by branch, and some read it as the simplest thing of all, the thing that happens every single day. The sun goes down into the dark. The world it leaves behind goes cold and quiet and a little frightened. And then, in the morning, the roosters cry, and a light comes up over the edge of the world, and she is drawn out of the cave of the night, and it is day again. And whichever of those it is, the shape is the same, and the shape is the oldest comfort there is. The light goes away, and it is unbearable, and it comes back. It always comes back, not because anyone forced it, because it was drawn out gently by warmth and by curiosity and by the sound of the world going on until it leaned toward the door and looked and stepped into the morning. She was afraid and she hid, and the world went dark, and 8 million gods stood in a dry riverbed and did not break the door. They hung a mirror in a tree. They strung 500 jewels. They lit the offerings and raised the first prayer. They set the roosters crying at a sky with no dawn in it, and they let a fearless goddess dance on an overturned tub until heaven shook with laughing, and the sun, alone in the dark, heard the world laughing and could not help it. She had to look. She pushed the stone. She saw the light in the mirror. She leaned out toward it, and a hand took hers and drew her into the morning, and a rope went across the door behind her, and it was day. The mirror is at ease, wrapped in the dark, being made new. The rope is on every gate. The dance is still danced. The roosters still call the light, and the sun still goes down into the cave every evening, and the world still goes and quiet, and the morning still comes. It always comes. The stone rolls back. The light leans out, and you can let the dark be gentle now. It is only the cave. She is only resting, and the morning is already on its way up the eastern sky, the way it always is, the way it always will be. Rest now. The stone is closed, and it is only night, and the night is safe, and she will come out in the morning. She always does. Sleep well.